Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers.
Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are glad you're joining us this week because Christy has an awesome case. Or at least she tells me that. I don't know what it is yet.
Well, you can be the judge by the end of it. But I will say, you guys, I picked a bad one. A bad seed, a rotten apple, a slimy snake of a dirtbag for today's case. The murder I will tell you about took place in the early 1900s. But it's a brutal one. We are discussing the murder of a child. So this is your warning. I know these ones aren't easy to hear, but every victim deserves to have their story told. Child murders are hard, but they were little people that shouldn't be glossed over in the true crime world.
It does seem extra wrong, though, when it's a child.
It does. It's definitely harder. The murder is graphic. I will tell you about the death and injuries, so if you need to tap out, that's okay. We still love you, and we will see you next week. But before we dive into it, speaking of love, we'd love it if you guys would give us a follow and rate and review us wherever you listen. So if you enjoy this podcast, we'd love for you to tell others by giving us a review. But if you hate us, disregard what I just said. And why are you here?
The reviews do mean so much to us.
They really do.
When it's late and we are knee-deep in research and not wanting to go on, a nice review is that extra oomph that we need to keep going.
That being said, we do thank you for your support that you have already shown us. We truly appreciate all of you. Just by listening each week, you are helping us. But still, go give us a good review.
Shout out to our snack pantry donators.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Honestly, we've been eating some snacks tonight. We've been at this for a while, and we do appreciate that. You guys are amazing. To start this episode, I'm going to begin with a quote from the killer after he was caught. Speaking about the murder, he said, quote, "I thought I was a superior being, above right and wrong. I committed murder to prove to myself that I was supernatural. Now I see that I was wrong."
So is he a remorseful dirtbag?
No, I don't think that he is. It was just a very cocky thing for him to say.
Yeah, that is an interesting statement.
Yeah, I hate this guy, and I think you will too.
I hate this guy.
I hate this guy. I've said it more than once, but he falls into this category. I found this case interesting because this dirtbag was one of the first cases for a defendant to use the not guilty by reason of insanity plea in Los Angeles. And he also claimed at one point that he was possessed by an evil deity named Providence, who told him to kill, which I feel like ties into our Halloween episode about the DeFeo family and the Amityville hauntings.
You're just trying to prove your case.
No, I don't think he was.
Okay.
That's hogwash. He absolutely was not possessed by an evil demon.
Okay. I thought you were still trying to sway my opinion.
No. But I did think it was interesting that this is actually one of the first cases to use this plea in Los Angeles. This low-life killer started out life quite ambitious with lots of potential, but through a series of bad decisions, he ended up becoming a total zero and a stain on society. Before we dig more into today's dirtbag, we are going to start with today's victim and her family. Frances Marion Parker was born a twin on October 11th, 1915 in Los Angeles, California. She was lovingly referred to by her middle name, so I will call her Marion, not Frances, throughout the case. Marion's fraternal twin sister was Marjorie Helen Parker. Marion and Marjorie were said to share a special bond, like most twins do. The girls were born to Geraldine and Perry. Their mother, Geraldine Howard Heasel, was born in Missouri in 1888 and was 27 when the girls were born. Their father's full name was Perry Marion Parker. I don't know if you noticed, but his middle name matches Marion's, which I think is actually super cute. I also noticed that Marion's mother's middle name was Howard, so maybe it was more customary for little girls to be given a middle name to represent their fathers during that time.
That is interesting.
Perry was born in Mansfield, Pennsylvania in 1879, so he would have been almost 36 when the girls were born. For some reason, I kept switching it up, calling him Perry and Mr. Parker in my notes. So just remember that Mr. Parker and Perry are the same guy, Marion's father. Because I was too lazy to go back and change it in all my notes. A lot of pages, you guys. Geraldine and Perry already had a son before their twin girls were born. He was also named after his father. Perry Willard Parker, who went by Bill, was born in Ocean Park, LA in 1907. So he would have been 8 years old when he became a big brother. Perry Sr. was a prominent banker for Security First National Bank, a successful job that he kept for 44 years. Little Marion was said to be a tomboy who loved to throw footballs. She was a sweet girl who had a lot of friends, but who preferred to spend time with her family. Marion was particularly close to her father, a daddy's little girl, if you will. She often would go to work with him just to be around him more. This picture-perfect family's lives would be turned upside down forever, starting on December 15th, 1927. Marion and Marjorie were 12 years old and attending grade 6 at Mount Vernon Junior High School, which was located in the Lafayette Square section of LA. Christmas was just 10 days away, and excitement was in the air. On this frightful day, a man who identified himself as Mr. Cooper walked into Mount Vernon Junior High School at around noon and approached the front office desk. He spoke to the school registrar, Mary Holt. This man told Mary that he worked with Mr. Parker at the bank and that Mr. Parker had been in a bad car accident. The man was young, slight in stature, and unassuming. And I think this is why I kept calling him Mr. Parker, because he would refer to him as Mr. Parker. So I think that's why I kept going back and forth.
Wonder how often this worked to kidnap children.
I don't know. It's a really terrifying thought.
This is just like the Greenleaf case, too.
It is. I did think about that case while I was researching this one.
Similar time frames.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Super terrifying. This man continued to say that he had been sent to the school to pick up Mr. Parker's daughter. When Mary asked the man which daughter he was there to pick up, the man panicked and said the younger one. Mary was confused and told the man that Mr. Parker's daughters were twins. To try and cover for his confusion, he quickly told Mary that he meant the smaller one. When Mary hesitated, the man told Mary that she was welcome to call the bank for herself and verify that he worked with Mr. Parker and was sent to pick up his daughter. Mary decided in a split second that if this man was encouraging her to double-check his story, that he must be telling the truth. And so she had Marion be excused from class and sent to the office.
Oh, that is so sad, because her spidey senses were up. She knew something wasn't right.
Yes, because anyone who really knew Mr. Parker would have known that he had twin daughters. Marion came to the office, and after being told that her father had been in an accident and wanted to see her, she willingly left with the man.
She didn't question why her sister couldn't go either?
But she was Daddy's little girl. She was the one who would go to the office with him, and so I think that's why he thought he only had one daughter. This is beyond a horrible situation. Poor Mary. She said later that she, quote, never would have let Marion go, but for the apparently sincerity and disarming manner of the man. Mary would have to live with the decision not to call the bank that day or ask the man for identification. I honestly could not imagine.
No, that would have been so awful.
It really was.
But it does really speak to his confidence that he was exuding.
Definitely. And that's what she said. It seemed legit. Marion was taken at lunchtime. Her sister Marjorie had no idea that her sister had left the school. Marion's parents had no idea either. Mr. Parker had not been in an accident and was at work perfectly unharmed. When school let out later that afternoon, Marjorie waited at the bus stop for Marion. The girls always rode the streetcar to and from school together. Their older brother Bill would have been aged 20 now and wouldn't have been going to school with them. When the streetcar pulled up, Marjorie panicked. She had no idea what to do. She had to make a snap decision, and so she got on the streetcar without her sister. When Marjorie returned home that day, at first, no one was too concerned. Her family assumed that Marion likely stayed after class to help her teacher. However, when Marion didn't return home after the next time the bus would have driven their route, the family became worried.
Did she often stay behind after school?
It sounded like she was helpful and would help the teacher clean up and that type of thing. But usually Marjorie would have known.
Okay. But it wasn't out of the norm for her to stay behind.
No, they weren't too worried at first. But it was not like Marion to be this late without an explanation. Especially because Marjorie didn't know. At 4:45 p.m., the Parkers called Marion's school to ask if she was still there. The office told them that Marion had left the school hours earlier to go see Mr. Parker. It was at this moment that both the school and the Parkers knew that something was wrong.
Your gut would hit the floor.
To know that she had been picked up at noon, and it's now 4:45. Living every parent's worst nightmare, the Parkers contacted police and reported their daughter missing. They began searching for their young girl, but there was no sign of her. It was like she and the strange man just vanished. That being said, the Parkers would know exactly what the mystery man's agenda was soon after Marion's abduction, when they would receive the first of many telegrams and handwritten notes by the monster who had taken their daughter.
No way, he's doing a ransom too?
He is.
This makes me wonder if this is where Carl got his idea from.
Could have.
That is crazy. What year was this? Okay, can I do some research?
Yes.
Sorry.
Let's see if it's connected. This is 1927.
Yeah, so Bobby Greenlease was 1953.
So this happened quite a ways before.
The similarities, though, are striking.
It's very uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about your case a lot while researching this one.
So is this guy running a get-rich-quick scheme too, like Carl was? Carl and Bonnie?
Well, he's definitely after some money.
Okay.
All of the telegrams and letters came to the Parkers' residence at 1631 South Wilton Place in LA. The first one came while the police were at the residence. The first telegram came from Pasadena, which is only about 10 miles away from LA. The second one came from a place called Alhambra, hopefully I'm saying that right, which is about 4 miles from Pasadena. These telegrams were signed George Fox and told the Parkers that further information would come regarding communication and ransom demands. These telegrams also warned Mr. Parker that he had better not interfere with the kidnappers' plans. One of them warned, quote, "Marion secure. Use good judgment. Interference with my plans, dangerous." The poor Parker family had to wait until the following day, December 16th, to hear anything more from this supposed Mr. Fox. This would have been torture, to spend the night not knowing if your child was okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
No, me either. There would be multiple notes delivered over the next while. The first note of these told Mr. Parker that he needed to prepare $1,500 worth of $20 gold certificates. Today, this is over 27,000 US dollars and over 37,000 Canadian. At the top of this note were Greek characters in order to resemble the word death.
Disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
But I can imagine that it would make you want to do what he said.
Oh, definitely. He's very to the point with these letters. And threatening. This note began by saying, quote, "Fox is my name, very sly you know. Get this straight. Your daughter's life hangs by a thread, and I have a Gillette ready and able to handle the situation." From what I could gather, a Gillette was a razor for shaving, like it is today. But when I looked up pictures, it appears that the blade was a removable, disposable blade, sometimes double-edged, so I assume he just meant that he had a razor blade and was threatening to use it. This note stated, quote, "Do positively nothing till you receive special delivery letter." This note was signed Fox. The dirtbag was trying to give himself a nickname. Also on this letter was Marion's signature to prove that she was alive when the letter was written. The same day, a second note came to Mr. Parker. This one also had the Greek characters to form the word death at the top of it. In this note, the kidnapper told Perry or Mr. Parker to get the gold certificates ready to deliver later that same night. He signed this one, Fate. I will read you this letter. Under death it begins. PM Parker, use good judgment. You are the loser. Do this. Secure 75 $20 gold certificates in U.S. currency, $1,500 at once. Keep them on your person. Go about your daily business as usual. Leave out police and detectives. Make no public notice. Keep this affair private. Make no search. Fulfilling these terms with the transfer of the currency will secure the return of the girl. Failure to comply with these requests means no one will ever see the girl again, except the angels in heaven. The affair must end one way or the other within 3 days, 72 hours. You will receive further notice, but the terms remain the same. and then he signed it Fate. At the bottom of the page, it said, quote, "If you want aid against me, ask God, not man."
Very menacing.
Mm-hmm.
And are these letters or, telegrams?
There was a mix of both.
Okay.
Some letters and notes and some telegrams. This was an actual letter, and I saw photos of this one. Parts of this particular letter were written in cursive, some parts in all caps, and some of the phrases were emphasized neatly to look more bold. And interestingly, the kidnapper decorated some of the letters, perhaps to try and throw police off from analyzing his handwriting.
Okay. But when somebody sends a telegram, there's another sender for that, right? Like you can't send a telegram yourself. You go in and somebody sends the telegram for you. So those original messages or the messages that he was delivering via telegram would have involved another person.
Yeah, you're likely right, actually. I didn't even think of that.
And so how is he expecting this to all stay secret?
Well, the telegrams themselves don't lead back to him.
Oh,
so whatever way he was doing it, it was anonymous.
Gotcha. Okay.
And he was sending them from different towns. Those first 2 telegrams came from different places.
Okay.
So nobody would have recognized him there.
Right, but the message in the telegram would alert somebody to there's something nefarious going on here.
It should have. That's a good point. That is a rabbit hole I guess I didn't go down. There were similar letters to this one delivered to Mr. Parker. They were all signed with one of the following words: Fox, Fate, or Death. Included with one of these notes was a letter written in Marion's handwriting. This note read, quote, "Daddy, please do what this man tells you, or he'll kill me if you don't. Your loving daughter, Marion Parker."
Sad to think that she had to write that. It takes away the thought that maybe she just didn't know what was going on or what was coming.
Definitely, because I'm sure she was instructed to write those specific words.
Mm-hmm.
After these horrifying letters, in the evening came a phone call from Marion's kidnapper. And I don't know how you could keep your composure while talking to a man who had your daughter and was threatening her life. You would want to just reach through that phone and strangle the dirtbag. Harry Parker was truly remarkable. The only thing he cared about was the safe return of his little girl. He did collect the currency, just as the dirtbag had asked, and was ready for further instructions when the call came in. Mr. Parker was instructed to come alone to 10th Street and Gramercy Place at a specific time. He was told that once Mr. Parker handed over the money, his daughter would be returned unharmed at the same spot. Before leaving, Mr. Parker carefully recorded the serial numbers from each of the gold certificates so that they could hopefully be traced to the kidnapper later on. Perry got into his car, money in hand, and drove to 10th and Gramercy Place. The kidnapper kept his word and showed up to the same spot. Marion was sitting in the front seat of the kidnapper's car, alive and well. At this point, the kidnapper had every intention of returning the girl for the payday. However, the police had followed Perry without Perry knowing, and the kidnapper spotted them.
How did they find out?
I think the police were keeping an eye on the Parker home, and when they saw him leave, they followed him. This, of course, spooked the kidnapper, and he turned back with Marion still in his possession. The exchange did not happen that night. Perry went home empty-handed. He would have had to tell his wife and other children that Marion was still gone. This would have been an impossible situation for everyone to be in. I cannot even imagine the panic. You would question if you would ever hear from the abductor ever again.
I think I would have been so angry at the cops that followed me. Or did he know that they had followed him, and that's why the kidnapper turned away?
He did not know at the time that they had followed him. He thought he was going by himself. He was just listening to everything that the kidnapper told him because all he cared about was getting his daughter back. The only thing he had done preemptively was write down the serial numbers on the gold certificates. Communication went silent until the next day when more letters were delivered. As you might expect, the first letter condemned Perry for not listening to the instructions that were laid out for him. The kidnapper said that he knew the police were spying on them at the exchange spot. By now, the press had also gotten wind of what was happening, and the kidnapper expressed his disdain over this fact as well.
That's so sad because Perry didn't know anything about any of that.
No, and he almost got her back alive. The kidnapper warned Perry that this day, December 17th, would be his last chance to get his daughter back alive. To prove that Marion was still alive, a letter was included, again in Marion's handwriting, urging her father to do what the man was asking of him. Part of her letter read, quote, "Please, Daddy, I want to come home tonight." She signed it again, "Your loving daughter, Marion Parker." More letters followed, again warning Perry of what would happen if he didn't listen. These letters were also signed the same way as the ones prior. Fate, Fox, Death. In one of these letters it read, quote, "PM Parker, please recover your senses. I want your money rather than to kill your child. But so far you have given me no other alternative." He also wrote, quote, "I will be 2 billion times as cautious and clever, as deadly from now on. You have brought this upon yourself and deserve it, and worse. A man who betrays his love for his own daughter is a second Judas Iscariot, many times more wicked than the worst modern criminal." Perry had a discussion with the police, and this time they agreed to let him go alone to retrieve his daughter in exchange for the money. This was no time to call the dirtbag's bluff. They waited, and finally the dirtbag called that same evening. This time he instructed Mr. Parker to meet him at the corner of West 5th Street and South Manhattan Place, located in central LA. He said he would call back when it was time.
How often was mail delivered?
I don't know how these were being delivered, because he would get them throughout the day.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. At 7:15 p.m., the phone rang again. The kidnapper told Perry to leave now and come to the meeting place alone. He told Perry that he knew what his car looked like, so he would recognize him when he got there. Before the hour was up, at around 8 o'clock p.m., Perry arrived at the corner of West 5th Street and South Manhattan Place. Moments after arriving, a vehicle pulled up next to Perry's car. The man staring back at him had his face almost completely covered with a bandana, so Perry didn't recognize him. Immediately, the man pointed a sawed-off shotgun at Perry. The man said to Perry, quote, "You know what I'm here for, no monkey business." Perry asked if he could see his little girl. The man motioned towards where Marion was sitting in the passenger seat and said she was sleeping. Perry could see his daughter inside the car. She was wrapped in clothing up to her neck but wasn't moving. Perry called out to Marion, but she didn't respond. Perry could see that her eyes were open, but since she wasn't responding to him, he thought that she had been drugged. He later said, quote, "I assumed she had been chloroformed." Without hesitation, Perry handed the man the money. To Perry's horror, once he had the money, the kidnapper put his car into gear and drove away. However, he came to a rolling stop up the street. He hollered, quote, "There's your daughter," and pushed her out of his car onto the street and sped off.
And she's already dead.
I already have goosebumps.
That would have been so awful.
It gets worse.
What?
As soon as Perry saw his daughter land on the ground, he ran towards her. He knelt down and picked her up, cradling her in his arms. Next, he let out what was described as a, quote, "soul-shattering, anguished cry." Perry was only holding part of his daughter, who was clearly deceased. What I'm about to describe to you is horrific and almost unimaginable that someone could do this to a child.
Skip ahead if you need to.
Yes. Honestly, do if you need to. This is probably the worst I've heard. Marion's arms and legs were missing. They had been amputated. Marion's entrails had been removed from her torso. Rags and a t-shirt had been stuffed inside of where her organs and intestines should have been. The skin on her back was beaten raw. There was wire cutting into her skin around her head, and her eyes had been sewn open with piano wire.
What?
I cannot imagine anything worse than this. How do you recover if you ever even could?
That is so gory.
It is.
And from a ransom, like that's... What, was the money his true motive? Or was this guy a true sicko and just wanted to defile a body?
Well, what he did to Marion's body just seems so far out of left field. We'll talk about his motives, but to me, it still does not explain why he would do something this brutal to a little girl, let alone anybody.
I don't understand this. It doesn't fit.
It doesn't. And I think that's why this is so horrific.
Is this his only crime?
No. And we're going to talk about his crimes. But this is a huge escalation from the crimes that he had before. There was no real lead up to explain something like this happening.
He hadn't murdered before this?
He had, but nothing brutal like this. I mean, every murder is brutal, but this is especially heinous.
This is disturbing.
It is. An autopsy showed that Marion had been dead for about 12 hours when her body was returned. This means that she was alive the first time an exchange was organized. There was no signs of a sexual assault, but I did read that they could not be 100% certain due to the state of her body. Marion's cause of death was determined to be either asphyxiation or loss of blood. The following day, on Sunday, December 18th, Marion's arms and legs and organs were found individually wrapped in newspaper at nearby Elysian Park by a man going for a walk.
That would be a disturbing discovery too.
It really was. And I actually came across a picture of this discovery that was printed in the newspaper at the time. It showed an officer kneeling near the paper packages. Everyone was shocked and horrified.
I'm actually not surprised.
For the time.
Yeah, for the time.
Yeah, it is shocking what they got away with in the news and media. A reward was issued for $50,000 to anyone who could produce Marion's killer, dead or alive. This reward was later increased to be $100,000. Today, that is over 1.8 million US dollars and 2.5 million Canadian.
So did somebody turn him in? That's a lot of money.
It really is, and we'll talk about that money very briefly later. A description of the child murderer was made public, and people everywhere were on the lookout. Perry hadn't gotten a good look at the man, but the lady at the school had. They knew the man was white, possibly around the age of 25, was only about 5'8" tall, was about a slender 150 pounds, and he was also described as having dark, wavy hair. The search for this dirtbag quickly became the largest manhunt in Los Angeles history at that time. It may even still be the largest manhunt for a single person to date. The hunt involved over 20,000 officers and American Legion volunteers. It was said that people hid in their houses out of fear, and many parents kept their kids home from school. The governor of California even closed the border into Mexico to prevent the killer from fleeing the country. People panicked, and anyone matching the killer's description was under fire. One man who resembled the killer was arrested 7 times in an 8-hour span.
Oh, really?
Yes. This man finally asked to just stay at the jail instead of constantly being picked up. He's like, let me just stay here for a while. Another man was spotted by a group of people and was severely beaten by them because they thought he was the child killer.
Oh, that's sad.
Well, it gets even sadder. This man was not the murderer. He was taken to the jail for protection, but he later hanged himself inside his jail cell, which is so tragic because he couldn't handle the fact that people thought that he did it.
That is sad.
Mm-hmm. And he had been beaten very badly.
Was it people that knew him that beat him?
No, it was just people saw him on the street and was like, that's the guy, that's him, get him. And it was a mob mentality. It was a bit of hysteria going on in the area, as you can imagine.
Sounds like it.
The LAPD, the LA County Sheriff, and the District Attorney's Office called in all available men to aid in the search. And I say men because in 1927 it would have been mostly men. But a little fun fact, Alice Stebbins Wells was the first LA member of the police force starting in 1910. More women followed, but by 1927, there still weren't very many. I believe just under a dozen. I went down a little rabbit hole about Alice, and she's a fascinating woman, so you should go learn about her too after you listen to this. Despite the astounding reward amount, it was good old-fashioned police work that cracked this case wide open. Even though there would be debate and lawsuits later about the reward money and who it should go to.
Did the police try to claim it?
There was some police, there was people who had reported sightings, there was quite a few people who thought that they should have had some of the money. And I didn't read that the money went anywhere, to be honest. It could have, but I just couldn't find the trail of what actually happened to the money.
Okay.
If it was given out at all. Police carefully examined the clothing and towels that Marion had been wrapped in and stuffed with. Upon inspection, they noticed a specific laundry mark on one of the fabrics. They were able to tie the laundry mark to an apartment house or building in LA. The authorities wasted no time. It was said that there were over 100 officers storming the apartment house at once. They went room by room searching for a man who fit the perp's description. Inside one of the rooms, they found a man sleeping. He looked like he could be their guy. The young man told police that his name was Donald Evans. Police searched his room, but didn't find anything suspicious to connect him to Marion's murder. Before the police left, this man said to them that he hoped that they would catch the fiend who killed the little girl.
Is it him?
This was the man who had killed Marion. Police just didn't know it yet.
Cocky.
He is so cocky. You do want to punch him in the throat. Aside from the physical description of the man, police also had a description from Perry on the vehicle that his daughter's murderer was driving. I've read differing accounts of what type of vehicle it was, so I'm not going to include it, but regardless, it was found by the police abandoned. The vehicle had been reported stolen 2 weeks prior in Kansas City, which is a full 24-hour drive away. Police processed the vehicle and found their smoking gun. Nice crisp fingerprints were retrieved from the car door. These fingerprints eventually matched prints left on the ransom letters and were later determined to be those of a known criminal in the area, a Mr. William Edward Hickman. This low-life human was a former employee at the exact same bank where Perry Parker worked, so there was a personal connection to the Parkers. Before I go into how this vile man was caught and what happened afterwards, I need to tell you who he is and how his life led up to this point. You would likely think he was a messed up individual who had endured years of abuse, but that is not the case. He was obviously messed up, but today's dirtbag had a very successful childhood and was considered a high achiever. He would easily be voted most likely to succeed by today's standards.
That is shocking.
This whole case shocked me. William Edward Hickman was born on February 1st, 1908 in Hartford, Arkansas. He went by Edward, so that is what I will call him. Edward was named after his father, William Thomas Hickman, who was born in 1880 in Arkansas. Edward's mother was Eva Margaret Buck, born in 1879, also in Arkansas. Edward was one of 5 children. He had 3 older brothers, Paul, Horace, and James, and then a little sister named Mary Lee. The only thing I found from his childhood was that he got caught stealing candy at age 11, but that didn't strike me as too concerning, especially since it was said that money was tight for the family. I stole gum when I was a little girl. That doesn't make you a dirtbag when you're a little kid. Edward attended high school in Kansas City. I was able to find photos of his high school yearbook page. Edward had an entire page for his photos because he was vice president of his senior class.
Oh.
I will read you the accomplishments that were written about Edward in his yearbook. Prepare yourself, there's a lot. Quote, Edward Hickman, Vice President, Senior Class. President, Central Webster Club. President, Central Chapter National Honor Society. Negative Debate Team, 25, meaning the year 25. Student Council, 24, 25, 26. Business Manager Luminary. Literary Editor, Centralian, 26. President, Central Classics Club, 25. Junior Aide, Central Thucydides Club, 23. Senior Ballot, Best Boy Orator. It then read about Edward, quote, an excellent scholastic standing and an unequaled record in extracurricular activities, have a high standard of ideals, will fix his memory in the annals of Central.
He was a high achiever.
Absolutely. Edward was also on the yearbook committee and worked at the Central Luminary School newspaper. When Edward found out that there was a cash reward for an orator contest, he practiced an hour every day. He came in second and won $5 for his family.
It was about the money.
He was. But he grew up with not much. On top of being an honor student, Edward also took on leadership roles in his church's Sunday school program. So how the heck does a person go from being such a high achiever to becoming a dirtbag capable of kidnapping and murdering viciously a 12-year-old little girl? Edward started making some very poor choices once his father left, and once he became friends with a boy named Welby Hunt. Edward's father deserted the family in 1925 when Edward would have been 17 years old. After graduating, Edward and his friend Welby decided to leave Kansas City and move to Alhambra, California. They both lived with Welby's grandparents in 1926. This was the year before Marion's death.
So did he have an accomplice in all this?
No, they get into trouble beforehand, but not for Marion's murder. Together, the boys got into trouble. They were caught committing forgery, armed robbery, and later even murder. Marion was not Edward's first murder, as we established. On December 24th, 1926, so Christmas Eve, and almost exactly a year before he abducted Marion, Edward and Welby decided that they would rob a drugstore. During the robbery, the boys shot an officer in the abdomen and shot and killed the druggist, Clarence Ivy Toms. They were able to flee the scene and were not connected to this crime until after Marion's death. So they got away with it. Both boys then got a job at the bank where Perry Parker worked. They were employed as messengers, and their greed got the better of them. Edward was caught forging $400 worth of checks at the bank. He was charged and prosecuted for his crime, not to mention fired from his job. And any guesses who testified against him?
Well, his good old friend did.
Nope. Mr. Perry Parker, Marion's dad.
So he had a vendetta out for him.
He did.
So it wasn't just all about the money.
I think it was both. It was revenge and the money.
Did his friend deliver the messages for him? They were both messengers.
His friend was not part of this. As a result of this crime, Edward was convicted and given probation. He went back and had to live with family in Kansas City for 6 months. After the 6 months was up, he moved back to LA. He moved into his apartment house under the alias Donald Evans. In addition to this, on May 24th, 1927, Welby's grandfather withdrew a large amount of money from his bank account. And the very next day, his dead body was found under Pasadena's Colorado Street Bridge.
They murdered his grandpa?
Yeah. Welby's grandfather's death was ruled a suicide because 5 different suicide notes were found, even though the letters were clearly written in 2 different people's handwritings.
What?
So again, they got away with murder. This one is not proven, and he doesn't admit to this one, but it's pretty easy to see.
Huh.
And this is the man who had taken them in. He'd lived with this family.
Where was the police?
A good question.
Why did they not question 5 different suicide notes in different handwriting? Because you were just talking about handwriting analysis.
Yep, but they ruled it a suicide. And maybe his wife was just, no, this is what happened. You don't want to think the unimaginable. But what are the chances? He takes out this large sum of money and the next day he shows up dead under a bridge. And the boys had already killed a man for money.
Right.
Edward would later say that he took Marion to get ransom money so that he could afford to go to university. He wanted to attend Park College, a Bible college in Kansas City. But I really do wonder if it was more of an element of revenge to what happened for Perry testifying against him. But I know that he was a greedy dirtbag too, so it probably was both.
Always both.
It is. After Edward had his initial close call with the police while they searched his apartment house, he decided to get out of Dodge. He fled north. Police tracked him via sightings going through Oregon and Washington. He was spotted in Albany, Portland, and Seattle. Apparently, he was using the $20 gold certificates that Perry had given him to pay for lodging.
Were the serial numbers being tracked? Were they known?
They eventually were, so they could prove that he had been at those places. In Albany, he was spotted at a gas station on December 20th in a stolen car from LA, purchasing gasoline. In Seattle, he used some of the ransom to purchase clothing on December 21st. It was December, and Seattle was much colder than California, and he needed warmer clothing to wear. Finally, police were able to catch up to him just 5 days after the murder on December 22nd, 1927, in Echo, Oregon. At around 6:30 in the morning on December 22nd, Edward was spotted again at a gas station in Portland fueling up. Police were stationed on all routes leaving Portland. Police Chief Tom Gurdens and Traffic Officer Buck Llewellyn recognized Edward from wanted posters, and a wild car chase ensued before they caught him. Edward was found with $1,400 worth of the gold certificates on his person. He was arrested and extradited to California. Police had been finding and gathering evidence while Edward was on the run. They found bloody footprints in Edward's apartment, along with partially burned drafts of ransom letters. They also found newspaper clippings of the murder hidden inside Edward's residence. On top of this, the building janitor stated that he had seen Edward carrying multiple packages to his car the night of the murder, as well as seeing him wipe the seats of the car down the next day. It is assumed that he was carrying the pieces of Marion to the car before going to the ransom exchange.
Disturbing. But how come police just knocked on the door and talked to him at the door? They didn't go in his apartment.
They went in his apartment and they looked around, but they didn't initially see anything too concerning. But it was when they went back and took a really deep look that they found the blood evidence and found these letters because he had all that stuff hidden. I'm not sure how they missed the bloody footprints, but he could have had something over top of it. Who knows?
Okay.
But it wasn't obviously noticeable when you first walked in. With the evidence piled up against him, Edward actually ended up giving a written confession. And I think this confession was around 19 pages long, but I was only able to find parts of it. That being said, he, of course, had hogwash mixed in with the facts. At first, Edward just admitted to helping kidnap Marion. He was the one to enter Marion's school, so he pretty much had to admit to this part. He also had to admit to making the phone calls and writing the ransom notes since his voice could be recognized and the notes had his prints on them and were written in his handwriting. When it came to admitting to the actual murder, though, that was a different story. Edward told police that 2 other men were involved, 2 brothers named Oliver and Frank Kramer. He said that the Kramer men had been the ones to kill Marion. In his confession, Edward stated that he and Marion got along well. He said he even took her to the movie Figures Don't Lie at the Rialto Theater. About her, he said, quote, "Marion and I were good friends, and we really had a good time when we were together, and I really liked her. I'm sorry that she was killed." Because he's going with this idea that the Kramer boys did it.
These are fictitious boys or real people?
They are real people, and I'm going to tell you about them in a second. Okay. He said that on the whole, Marion seemed comfortable with him and only cried a little when she missed her parents. He said, quote, "She felt perfectly safe, and the tragedy was so sudden and unexpected that I'm sure she never actually suffered through the whole affair, except for a little sobbing when she couldn't keep back for her father and mother."
So is he trying to comfort himself by saying it's not so bad? Or is he trying to comfort the family? Like, I'm wondering about his motives to say all these things. Because very obviously, if she had to write a note that said, "He's going to kill me," she knew exactly what was happening. There's no way that she's calm and not feeling fearful.
Right.
So why is he making all these statements?
Well, at the beginning, he's trying to make himself seem like he's not that bad of a guy. I was just in it for the money. I was trying to keep her happy. I took her to a movie. I don't know if he even actually did. But he was saying she wasn't really that upset. She was so adventurous, and it took her a while till she was really getting homesick and wanting to go home. Do we believe him? Probably not.
No.
Police looked into the claims that Edward made about the Kramer brothers, and they were able to prove without doubt that they were not involved. The brothers had airtight alibis. They were both already in jail on the night of the murder and had already been locked up for months.
He just picked out some criminals that he had worked with before and tried to lay the blame on them.
Yeah, not knowing that they had been locked up for several months already. Edward said that Marion was not murdered in his Bellevue Arms apartment house, but the blood evidence found there was said to match Marion's. It was after police kept proving his lies that Edward decided to spill the truth. It was at this time that he additionally admitted to the other killing and armed robberies. Edward described the process of how he ended Marion's life. I'll explain briefly what he did, but even briefly, it's awful. So if you need to skip ahead again for a few seconds, that's okay.
Again, Christy?
Yeah. Edward had decided that Marion would be able to identify him. Also, he explained that Marion had been in good spirits for the majority of the time that he had her, but after 3 days, she became homesick and kept demanding to go home. She was getting loud with her demands, and he was worried that someone would hear her. Inside his Bellevue Arms apartment, Edward tied her to a chair and blindfolded her. He proceeded to strangle her with a towel until she became unconscious. Next, Edward carried her body to his bathtub. He cut her jugular vein and tried to drain her blood. With her body still in the tub, he removed her insides, arms, and legs. He admitted that her body jolted so forcefully that it made him wonder if she was still alive when he started to cut her. Edward wrapped her pieces in newspaper and set her torso in a suitcase. After cleaning up, he went to the Lowe's State Theater to watch a film, but he said he was too upset to pay attention and just cried the entire time. When Edward returned home, he realized that Perry would likely want to see that his daughter was alive before handing over the money. And so that is when he tried his best to make her look alive and reconstructed. He put makeup on her, stuffed the fabric inside of her, and sewed her eyes open so that she would appear awake. This man is truly disgusting.
Yeah, this is disturbing.
It is. Although Edward made a confession, he did not take responsibility for his actions. His trial began on January 25th, 1928. Edward claimed that he had been coerced by a supernatural force named Providence to kill the girl. This gave him grounds to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. As I mentioned earlier, this was a brand new defense in the state of California, and Edward was one of the first to use it. I think it was less than a year old.
It's an interesting claim by somebody that was described as so academic before.
Right? So he knew, if I say that a demon possessed me, then they're going to think that I'm insane.
How many people do you think would just believe him because the alternative is actually more disturbing? It's so much easier to blame a supernatural force for all this evil that he did to Marion than to believe an actual human being with a sound mind could do it.
That's true. I don't think people really question, but maybe to comfort themselves, maybe some people were hoping that that's what it was.
Yeah, it would almost be more comforting to think that than it would be to think that somebody in their right mind could do this.
Right, that a man would actually do this to a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. Because even for us listening now, it would be easier to understand and accept. Because you would think that you have to be an evil force to do something like this.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, this case took the media by storm. Hundreds of people lined up to get inside to witness the trial take place. The public became outraged when the judge reserved seating for his political acquaintances as well as for his wife and her friends.
Oh, nice.
They got preferred seating.
That is not something new.
No.
And I don't think it's something that's going to stop.
During his trial, Edward's defense team stated that Edward was mentally ill and had been influenced by his grandfather's religious affairs. They said that Edward was exposed by his grandfather to, quote, frenzied religious exorcisms, out of the limbo of the subconscious mind, surcharged with severe repressions of his awful childhood, homicide and mutilation ideated.
That's a lot of big words.
That spell hogwash. To counteract this claim of insanity, the prosecution had prison guards from the prison in Oregon, where he had initially been held, testify that Edward had asked them how he could, quote-unquote, act crazy during his incarceration before his trial. It was said that he did try to act crazy while locked up and sometimes during the trial. He would spontaneously yell or laugh and would pretend to be deaf sometimes. So he was playing this up. Edward was said to be almost cocky that the judge would go easy on him. He said about the judge, quote, he won't hang me. He doesn't believe in capital punishment, but I guess I'll throw a fit for him in court.
Oh, please tell me he gets the capital punishment.
Told you I hate this guy.
Is he publicly anatomized?
No, he should have been, though. To try and help him, Edward's mother came and tried to defend her son and testified that, quote, insanity ran in the family.
Okay. Did murder as well?
Not that I read of. A Pendleton psychologist did examine Edward for the courts. Dr. W.D. McCary stated that Edward's mind seemed clear and that he, quote, told a straight, coherent story and was never at a loss for words. There was nothing about him to indicate insanity. He says that he does not like girls, that he is deeply religious, and that his ambition was to become a minister. Several times he made mention of God. The prosecution did argue as well that Edward had targeted Marion Parker in an act of revenge for testifying against him for his crime against the bank. It was also suggested that Edward killed the girl and admitted to his other crimes to gain notoriety. He told one reporter that he wanted as much press coverage as he could and that he wanted to be as famous as the high-profile killers Leopold and Loeb. I was not familiar with Leopold and Loeb, but a quick wiki search stated that they were two American students who kidnapped and murdered 14-year-old Bobby Franks in Chicago, Illinois in 1924. This murder was characterized at the time as the crime of the century. They wanted to demonstrate that their superior intellect was what helped them carry out a perfect crime without consequences.
Okay, now that is totally fitting in with his schooling and seeking accolades.
Yes, that's what I thought too. And if you remember, Melissa asked in a different case that I recently did if the dirtbag confessed for the glory of it, and it would seem like Edward Hickman did, at least in part. Thankfully, William Edward Hickman was found guilty in February 1928 after a very short deliberation by the jury. It was well under an hour.
Oh, wow.
I heard like 36 minutes, 45 minutes, but everything I heard was under an hour. He was convicted of, quote, murder of the first degree without extenuating circumstances. And on Valentine's Day, he was given the sentence of death by hanging. He was also tried for and convicted of kidnapping charges. Edward entered San Quentin Prison in California on March 17, 1928, as prisoner number 45041. Edward, of course, appealed his conviction, but the conviction and death sentence was upheld by the California Supreme Court in the fall of 1928. While he awaited his execution, it was said that Edward turned to the Roman Catholic religion. In a separate trial, both Edward and Welby were tried for the druggist's murder that he had admitted to, and both were given life in prison for the murder of Clarence Ivy Toms. A year after the murder, and just 9 months after being found guilty, Edward met his fate. People were swarming and fighting over a spot to witness the execution. There were over 400 people who made their way in. It was standing room only.
It's surprising that they had that much room.
It is. 400 people is a lot.
Yeah.
On October 19th, 1928, Edward made his way up 13 steps to the top of the gallows. His execution did not go smoothly. He got his just comeuppance, because during the first attempt, the rope snapped and he had to be strung up again. The second time, as Edward fell through the trapdoor at the top of the gallows, he struck his head. His neck did not snap, and so he swung and hung. It was said that he was, quote, violently twitching and jerking. It took a long time for him to die. Since his neck didn't break, he died from asphyxia, which seems fitting, seeing that he had strangled poor Marion.
I was looking up, what's the definition of providence? And it's the protective care of God. But I guess he didn't have that, did he?
He did not. It was said that he never really expressed any remorse for what he did. I actually saw a photo of him grinning while he read the testimony transcripts from his trial.
He was proud of himself.
Yeah, he was rereading it and just smiling.
Ugh.
Enjoying it, to relive it maybe. He was quoted saying about him often smiling, quote, "Why shouldn't I grin? There will be plenty of time for remorse when I get in the death cell or up in the gallows at San Quentin. I'll do my worrying then." And I wonder how worried he really was. I hope he trembled with fear.
Doesn't sound like he would, though.
No. And in the moments leading up to his death, he seemed more concerned about where he was going to be buried. He asked the warden to make sure that he was buried there so that his mother didn't have to spend a lot of money to bring his body home. Edward was just 20 years old at the time of his execution. He was 19 when the murder took place. He was buried at the Holy Catholic Cemetery in Colma, California. This case, although I hadn't ever really heard of it, remains one of LA's most infamous cases. Artifacts from this case, I believe, are still on display at the LA Police Museum. And a little side note, if you have a police museum in your area, you should totally go. Melissa and I went to one near us, and it was fascinating.
Highly recommend it.
We loved it. Before I end, I want to give an update on Marion's immediate family, whom have all now passed away. Perry Parker, Marion's father, passed away in 1944 at the age of 65. He died in a Los Angeles, California hospital following an operation. Geraldine Parker, Marion's mother, passed away in San Diego at the age of 75 in 1963. She and Perry had stayed married after Marion's death, and I don't believe she ever remarried after Perry died. Marion's brother, Perry Parker, who went by Bill, died in LA in 1983 at the age of 75. He was an Air Force veteran and had served in World War II and the Korean War. He was married twice and had a daughter. Marjorie Parker, Marion's twin sister, died in 1987 in a hospital in San Diego County at the age of 71. She became a legal secretary and served as the San Diego Legal Secretary's president in 1956 and 1957. She stayed active in her church. She was married and had 2 stepsons. And that is the story of a self-proclaimed sly fox who was actually just a greedy coward who preyed on the love that a father had for his daughter to get what he wanted. The extremely selfish and vile dirtbag, William Edward Hickman.
Yeah, he was a vile dirtbag.
Yeah, vile's not even a strong enough word to describe him. And I apologize, this one was really gruesome, but like I said at the beginning, Marion deserved to have her story told too.
It was like pride pushed him to, I don't know, was it pride or?
A feeling of superiority.
Yeah.
Like he said in that beginning quote of his. I really think he thought that he was above all else and that he would get away with it. He just had award after award and was president of all these clubs and thought he was so smart.
Not smart enough to get away with murder. And neither is our dirtbag next week, when we hope you'll join us again.
Until then,
See ya!
bye. Oh, we have to test first.
We've been testing all night. It's good. It's
Yeah,
good.
you're not editing this one. We're testing, lady. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You've got me in the right mood, Christy.
All right. She's
I'm
a
full of-
loosey-goosey.
Full of ice cream. Like, let's go, baby.
She's ready to go. So I'm going to get into it before we lose her. Before she crashes. Was born in Missouri. What?
They were born to parents. So, I find that so funny. Isn't every child born to parents?
I just flipped through the bird, if anybody's wondering.
So,
I had two parents, comma,
sure.
Geraldine and Perry.
I get it. But in my head, they were born to parents. Okay. Shocking.
Kate, next time less ice cream for you. Because I know in about 30 minutes you're going to crash.
So true. You got to get through this quick.
I do. Okay. Let me re-say this. Maybe she's possessed by a demon named, what would I say, Providence?
You're bumping your mic. It's swinging in the wind, that flaccid little thing.
I know, I broke it, you guys. Marion's parents had no idea. Many times more wicked than the worst modern. But a quick wiki search. A quickie.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.